Welcome to Alpha Kappa Psi's webinar titled Becoming a Pro at Parli Pro. This webinar is part of the Chapter Operations series. My name is Mackenzie Lauka, and I serve AK Psi as the Associate Director of Education. I'll be your webcast producer. Before we dive into the content, I would like to review the web-based features available to you. This webinar will be advanced remotely, but at the bottom of your screen, there are multiple application widgets you can use throughout the program. I encourage you to utilize the widgets to download additional resources, connect with other attendees during the presentation, and share highlights via social media. A copy of the slide deck and other additional materials are available in the resource list widget that looks like a green folder. The group chat is available for you to interact with other attendees and the presenter during the presentation. When posting, it will share your first name and last initial, but be sure to also mention your chapter or university. If you have any technical difficulty, please click on the Help widget. It has a question mark icon and covers most common technical issues. Additionally, each of the windows on your screen are able to be resized, moved, and adjusted to fit your individual learning need. At the end of the program, I'll explain how you can ask a question to our panelists. If you have a question throughout the program, however, you can launch the Q&A widget to submit your question. Your questions will be asked at the end of the program in the order they are received. Be sure to also check out our social media content. Portions of today's program will be tweeted using the hashtag AKPsiChat. You can follow along using the Twitter widget in the menu dock at the bottom of the screen, as well as post highlights to your own Twitter feed using the hashtag. You may also find some valuable resources on the AKPsi blog, Facebook page, Instagram feed, LinkedIn page, Twitter feed, and our YouTube channel, each of which are available from the akpsi.org homepage. Chapter meetings are a time to discuss important issues. With many people wanting to voice their opinion and be heard, it can be easy to get off topic. Parliamentary procedure can help your chapter stay on track and focus on the bigger picture. During the webinar, we will learn the fundamentals of parliamentary procedure and how it can enhance meeting efficiency. In addition to covering these topics, we'll leave time for your questions and comments on the subject matter. For our program today, we have one presenter who's going to provide guidance and support while also provoking thoughts and awareness, so you walk away from today's program with new insight on the topic. At this point, I'd like to introduce our presenter. Emanuela Casimir is originally from Haiti. She attended Florida International University, where she obtained a dual degree in political science and criminal justice, and pledged Alpha Kappa Psi in spring 2008. As a member, she was appointed and served as a chapter parliamentarian for 3 presidents. Upon graduation, she was employed by Target, where her exceptional leadership skills led her to be an executive. Currently, Emanuela is a JD candidate at Barry University School of Law and is the regional parliamentarian for the Atlantic Gulf Coast region of Alpha Kappa Psi. Before I hand the presentation over to Emma, we do have a great opportunity tonight for all attendees to win a copy of the book, The ABCs of Parliamentary Procedure. We have 5 copies of the book we will be raffling off to chapters for their attendance and participation. You will receive 1 entry each for attending the live webinar, asking a content-related question, posting in the group chat, and completing the survey after the event. After the live webinar, 5 chapters will randomly be selected from the entries and contacted to claim their prize. So be sure to stay engaged, and you might be able to win a copy of the book for your chapter. Now to get started, I'll hand the presentation off to Emma.
Thank you, Mackenzie. Before jumping into the finer details, I'm going to start with a little background on parliamentary procedures, what it is, and why we're talking about it today. Parliamentary procedures and rules considers the often conflicting interests that develop during meetings, and they provide procedures that ensure decisions are made fairly. It originates from Robert's Rule of Order. So now Robert was a general who, after getting out of the military, found that meetings were not run very efficiently. He created these rules to streamline the process, and the rules have since been adopted as a leading guide for parliamentary procedures. Alpha Kappa Psi has adopted Robert's Rule of Order as the parliamentary authority for meetings and is stated in Article 7, Section 3 of the Constitution. This means Robert's Rule of Order should be followed when you're conducting official business, meaning both chapter-wise during chapter meetings and fraternity-wide during chapter congress, which takes place at convention. If you will be attending convention as a delegate, it is especially important to understand how parliamentary procedures work. Let's start by covering a few basic definitions. First off, Constitution. Constitution defines the basic structure and regulation of an organization, including name, purpose for existing, membership, qualification, etc. All organizations have constitution, including Alpha Kappa Psi. When hearing constitution, you should also think statutory code for our organization, as both are included in the same document. Bylaws are basic regulations governing the organization. Outside of organization, it may be common thought to think of the Constitution and bylaws as one and the same. But per our governing documents, bylaws typically refer to the chapter bylaws, while the Constitution refers to the rules set by the entire fraternity. These are the two main documents you will be referring back to frequently, so you should be familiar with them and know the fraternity's policies. Knowing the basic definition and rules of parliamentary procedures are just a start. There are minimum requirements that must be in place for a meeting to occur. To carry out business, you must have three things. First, quorum, as defined in the organization bylaws. A presiding officer to lead the meeting and a secretary to take minutes. Quorum is the minimum number of members who must be present to hold and conduct a business meeting. This can vary by organization. However, for the fraternity, we use a simple majority, which is 50% plus one of the members in good standing. If you do not have 50% plus one members in good standing present at the meeting, you cannot conduct business until this requirement is met. This is stated in Article 4, Section 2 of the Constitution. The presiding officer is also known as the chair of the meeting and is the meeting leader who ensures the rules are being observed. Normally, this individual will be the president or the chapter, but if the president is not present, unavailable, or unwilling to be chair at the meeting, the next individual in line of succession becomes the presiding officer. In a student chapter, that will most likely be the vice president of administration. Additionally, you must have someone taking accurate minutes of the meeting. This is the job of the secretary. However, in his or her absence, you must have someone else filling this role in order to conduct business. Without these three things, you cannot conduct your meeting. Quorum is not enough, and it's often a misnomer among people that it is all you need. If your presiding officer is not present or unable to attend, you should follow your succession chain of command to step into the role for the meeting. It is also best practice to approve the previous meeting minutes. Now, to save time, you can send the previous minutes to the chapter, the entire body chapter, 24 hours in advance to review, and during the meeting should approve them with a majority vote. During a meeting, a motion is a formal proposal to take action. Motions. Motions are made during meetings at varying times. A question is another name for a motion after it has been seconded by an individual and restated. There are multiple different types of motion which we will walk through during the presentation. So again, a motion is a formal proposal to take action. The first type of motion that we're going to talk about is main motion. Main motions are the lowest ranking motions, which means they rank lower than all the other types of motions. We are going to review today main motions, incidental motions, subsidiary motions, and privilege motions. So main motion ranks lower than all those type of motions. The role of a main motion is to bring new business before the assembly for consideration. They have to be made while no other motion is pending. These are the most common motions you will make as a member. They require a vote of the assembly and will yield to any privilege, subsidiary, and incidental motion if they are made. The assembly cannot address more than one main motion at a time. This controls the conversation of the room and can help focus the attention of the issue. With only one issue posed at a time, it can also help deter getting the conversation getting off track and members losing sight of what the issue is about. Main motion. In order to make a main motion, there are 7 steps to follow. 7 simple steps. First, the member is recognized by the chair by any acceptable protocol determined by the chapter. It could be Brother President, it could be Mr. President, Brother President is common. So then the member proposes a motion. The member addresses the chair by Brother President. The chair, which usually is the president, as I mentioned earlier, will recognize the brother. The brother will respond, I move to. Now, notice that it's I move to as opposed to I motion. So the brother responds, I move to such and such, such and such, and proposes the motion. You can propose the motion in writing or read verbatim what has already been written. When finished making a motion, sit and wait until later to explain why the motion is a good idea. So when making the motion, when a member moves, you sit, you wait, you sit, you do not go into explanation until the chair addresses, until another member seconds the motion and the chair restates the motion. So the steps follow. The second step, another member seconds the motion. Once the member seconds the motion, that motion belongs to the assembly, not the individual. So after the motion is moved, another member says, I second, and now the motion belongs to the assembly, which is why there is a common practice of friendly amendments. During debate, I've seen this in chapters. Sometimes we'll say friendly amendment, and we'll add a friendly amendment, and the person that made the motion can either accept or deny the friendly amendment. That is incorrect. That's an incorrect practice, because once the motion is seconded, it no longer belongs to that individual. It belongs to the assembly. However, the third step is the chair must restate the motion. Please note, neither making or seconding a motion places it before the assembly. Again, neither making it or seconding it places it before the assembly. The chair must restate the question. And this step is important because a lot of the time, the members in the audience, the chapter is confused at what motion we're voting on. So it's important for the chair to restate every time, each step of the motion, each step before voting, every step, the chair must restate the motion and what is going on. So the chair would restate the question, something like that. It would sound like this. It is moved and seconded that, ... Is there any discussion? Once the chair says, is there any discussion, that officially opens the floor up for debate. After debate, the chair takes the vote. The chair states the result and disposition. Now that we've talked about how to move, how a member presents and bring new business to the floor, which is what a main motion is, we'll talk about effective debating. When it comes time for the floor to open for debate, it is essential to follow parliamentary procedures, as this is when chapters will typically see their meetings take a long term. This is the point when differing opinions are out and in the open and tension is high because everyone wants their opinion heard, everyone wants to make a point. So Parli Pro will keep debate on track. All members, please remember, all members have the right to know the meaning of the motion before the assembly and to know what its effect will be on the chapter. This is very important to lay out, as everyone needs to feel comfortable about what they are voting on before the vote takes place so they can appropriately make their decision. Let's go over a few essential points that are common mistakes during chapter discussion. First, time. Time. The assembly can set a standing time limit on all debates. For example, 5-minute total per motion or 1 minute per person. One example of this would be when the president or the vice president assemblies the meeting agenda. By each presiding officer, everyone that's going to present, they can put a time limit next to that person for 5 minutes, because once chapter approves that, that means that's the time limit set for that chapter meeting. So chapter, also you can have it in your standing rules at what debate will be, for example, for 10 minutes, debate will be for a total of 5 minutes. Parli Pro is meant to make meetings efficient and not time consuming. You should be able to debate without spending a lot of time on one subject. So time, the assembly can set a standing time limit on all debates. And the warden will keep time, and time limit must be respected. So once the time has been implemented, the time limit must be respected. During the debate, if the topic needs more time to be fully discussed, a member may move to extend the limit of debate, which is a motion, which is another motion, and that motion takes a 2/3 vote without debate. So again, to extend the time of a debate, a member may raise their hand, get acknowledged by the chair, and move. I move to extend the limits of debate on this particular topic for blank minutes. Once the chair goes through back the the 7 steps of a motion, the chair restates, it's seconded by a member, the chair restates the motion. The motion is voted on because this motion does not allow for a debate, so it goes straight into a vote, and the vote requires a 2/3 vote. Once it's accepted by a 2/3 vote, that time limit for which the member that moved the motion placed on the motion is now the time limit for that debate. Number 2, number of speeches. Number of speeches. No member can speak more than twice to the same question on the same day. The second time can only happen after all who wishes to speak has gotten a chance to speak. So just give me 1 second. We have a really good question that I wanted to address so everyone can hear. Does the presiding member of the chapter meetings have to be the chapter president, or does it depend on the chapter constitution and bylaws? The chair of a meeting, normally, most of the constitution or bylaws, it would state, if your bylaws state that the chapter chair has to be the president, then that is, if it's in your bylaws, then that is the presiding chair. If the president is not present during the meeting, then if the president is not present during the meeting, then it goes to the next presiding officer, the next succession in line. So again, if it's in your bylaws, then that is the person that has to chair the meeting. And normally, the default for Robert's Rule of Order, the presiding officer, is usually the president of the organization or the vice president, somebody on the board. I hope that answers the question. I hope that answers your question. And another great question is it possible, can the chair use technology to type up the motion so everyone can see it? Absolutely. That is a very good tool to make meetings efficient, because one of the things that what I suggest is the person writing the person that comes to chapter, if they know the topic ahead of time, for example, if the president emails out the chapter agenda, or there was a topic that was discussed prior last chapter and the chapter didn't find a final resolution on it. So as a member, you already know you want to present that business to chapter. Write out the motion, write it out, and if the chapter has an overhead, place it on the overhead and have the chapter see it. However, is not a substitute for the presiding officer to restate the motion, because that is the only way the motion is available to the assembly. It's presented to the assembly is after the presiding officer restates it. I hope that answers your question. Thank you for your questions. One of the great questions I've seen. One of the things that I've seen normally is we're just going to answer this last question, and we'll address any further questions at the end during Q&A, just for time purposes, so we have really good stuff to go through. One of the great questions I've seen is, can the parliamentarian hold the chapter since because of Robert's Rule Order? The default is the parliamentarian is there as a guide. The presiding officer should hold the meeting, not the parliamentarian. Okay, so third, The third thing about debate, the second thing we talked about was number of speeches. No members can speak more than twice to the same question on the same day. The second time can only happen after all who wishes to speak has gotten a chance to speak. So during a debate, if a person wants to talk more than once, they have to wait. The brother has to wait until everyone that wanted to speak on the issue has spoken before they can rise up again a second time to speak. And after that second time, that is the last time they are allowed to talk on that debate during that session. Third, format. To keep the meeting flowing, you should follow a pro-con-pro format. By default, the person who made the motion has the floor first. But if they do not want to speak, they have the right to pass or have someone else speak on their behalf. So for example, after the president has said, it is moved and seconded that blank, 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 is there any discussion? The president can also go ahead and say, brother so-and-so, whoever made the motion, would you like to speak on this motion? And that brother can now stand and say, yes, brother president, this is, and state their side, or they can pass it and decide not to speak if they want. Fourth, and finally, all members have the right to ask for clarification or bring up a point of discussion. The minority has an equal right to speak on the issue and to be heard in full, fair, and equitable debate. The debate should continue following pro-con-pro format until everyone has had the chance to speak and there is no new information to present. After debate, the chair may say, are you ready for the question? The question on the floor is blank, blank, blank. Or the chair can also say, is there any more discussion? Once the chair says, is there any more discussion? And the chair notices that there's no other discussion, the chair then concludes by saying the question on the floor is. This step is extremely important because especially if we're voting in the middle of the main motion, if brothers are moving to add amendments, secondary amendments, if they're moving to add extended time, to add other non-debatable motions, it's extremely important that the chair restates every time what the chapter is voted on. So as a recap on debate, so far this is how it looks like. The brother raises their hand to get acknowledged by the president. President acknowledges his brother so-and-so. Brother so-and-so stands and says, Mr. President, I move that we blank, blank, blank. If there's no second immediately, the chair can respond, it is moved that we blank, blank, blank. Is there a second? If there's a second, the member says, any member that agrees with the motion says, I second it. Once that is seconded, the president responds, it is moved and seconded that we blank, blank, blank. Is there any discussion? Once discussion has happened, the chair then says, is there any more discussion? Seeing that there's no more discussion, we will move into voting. The question on the floor is whether or not to blank, blank, blank. All in favor say aye, all opposed, etc., based on what voting procedures we're going to raise, if it's going to be raise a hand or by acclamation. Okay, so that concludes debating. Now we're moving on to voting procedures. We're going to go over voting procedures real quickly. It is important to remember that each voting member has one vote, and the vote of all voting members are counted equally. Parliamentary procedures does not allow for absentee voting or voting by proxy. If you are not present at the meeting, the vote is taken, nobody can make a vote on your behalf, and you do not get a vote. Types of votes. We have secret ballot, viva voce, roll call, show of hands. Some situations call for a specific type of vote, such as when voting on inducting pledges or initiating new members, you must use a secret ballot. If the bylaws do not stipulate the method of voting, you should include the method you would like to use in your motion. So for example, that simply just means that I move to blank, blank, blank by acclamation, by 2/3 vote, because that includes the method of voting in your motion. The presiding officer should call for the vote, asking for those for, against, and abstaining. They should then tally the vote, announce the results, and discuss the next steps to implement the motion if it was adopted. Everyone should know the bylaws and different requirements for voting. For example, when voting on pledges, it only takes more than 25% of the chapter to vote, No to remove a pledge from the pledging process. Note that that is 25% of members in good standing, not 24% of those present at the meeting. So what that means is that 25% is for of good standing. You look at your whole roster of members of good standing, and that's that percentage. Versus when it says 25% of those present, that's 25% of those members that are actually sitting in the room right now having part of the meeting after your chronicle. Now that we know how to debate and vote, let us review some other types of motion you might encounter. Okay. The second type of motion we're going to talk, so we talked about main motion, the next one is subsidiary motion. So some of these motions you have, some of them you have to postpone indefinitely, to amend, to refer to committee, to postpone to a certain time or indefinitely, to limit or extend the limits of debate, to call for the previous question, to lay on the table. We have some resources of this presentation. You're going to be able to see the motion charts, the 13 ranking motions. So it's extremely for you to grab. Each member should have a copy of those. It'll help tremendously during chapter for individuals to know which type of motions they can move at which time, if it's appropriate, whether or not it allows for debate, whether or not it's what type of vote it has. So the presiding officer should always have that chart available, so it could be used as a guide to know whether it's a 2/3 vote or a majority vote in order when we're making different types of motions. Like, for example, to call for the previous question, that requires a 2/3 vote. So let's go through the types, let's go through briefly about the different types of subsidiary motions. To postpone indefinitely basically kills the motion. That motion is made when there's a main motion on the floor and chapter realizes we're running out of time and it's not really worth, or we don't feel like we should continue voting on this or discussing this topic. A member may move and move to postpone indefinitely the motion, blah, blah, blah. And we go through the 7 steps of motion that we already covered, and it basically kills the motion. That motion will not be brought up again. To amend. Amendment applies to the main motion, and it takes a majority vote. For example, amendments, if there's a main motion on the floor to, I move to sell pizza, for example. An amendment may be, I move to insert the word pepperoni before pizza. So now the motion reads, I move to sell pepperoni pizza. So that's an amendment. An amendment takes a majority vote. Now note, the amendment is debatable and requires a vote. So first, once an amendment is made, because subsidiary motions rank higher than main motion, you have to vote on the main amendment first before you can vote on the main motion. It makes sense, really, because the amendment, if adopted, will change the main motion completely. So the presiding officer, again, goes through the 7 steps of a motion, and places the motion into debate, and that requires the vote. When a majority vote is if adopted, the new motion becomes blank, 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 and the chair restates that new motion to be clear to all the brotherhoods. The second type of the third type is to refer to a committee, to postpone to a certain time or definitely. This motion is basically sending it to be discussed at the next chapter. That one requires for there to be a time, that is a time and a place, if it's not going to be the next general meeting. To limit or extend limits of debate, we already covered that. To call for the previous question. Now this motion is a time saver. It's actually one of my favorite motions, because what this does is during a debate, for example, any kind of debate, as a member, if I'm sitting in the audience, I notice this debate has gone on for 20 minutes because we keep extending the limits to debate and we keep voting, we keep extending time. I simply will move. I call for the previous question. Of course, you have to get recognized by the chair. Once you get recognized by the chair, you move the previous question. It immediately closes the debate. And it immediately closes debate. So the chair then says, the previous question has been called. All in favor, all opposed, motion passes. We will now vote on the original motion. Okay? Then we have to lay on the table. The previous question is not debatable, and it takes a 2/3 vote. So you can't debate on it. You just simply put it into vote. If it passes by a 2/3 vote, it closes the debate that we're having, and it goes into a vote. Okay? So now we'll move on to privilege motions. Since we're going in order of ranking, the highest ranking motions in this category are privilege motions. These motions do not relate to the pending motion. It mostly deals with special matters, takes precedence overall. To call for orders of the day. I know you guys probably hear that a lot. I call for the orders of the day. It is used when chapter is getting off topic on a subject. It may interrupt. It does not need to be voted on. Once the order has been called, chapter gets back in order. So it goes like this. A member says, Mr. President, I call for the order of the day. The chair responds, the order of the day has been called. We will now be blah, blah, blah. Gets back into order. Then we have to raise the question of privilege. That's basically when you want to go to the restroom, or it's personal privilege. It's a privilege for you to take a recess, to adjourn, or the highest one of all is to fix the time of which to adjourn. So this motion is rarely used to fix the time to which to adjourn, but it's important to note because once you run out of quorum, the only thing you can do, the only motion that is appropriate is the time to fix the time of which to adjourn, which basically gives a time and a place of which that regular meeting will resume. Because sometimes chapters do run out of quorum, and you cannot continue the meeting if you don't have quorum. So those motions are, that one motion is the motion you can make when you run out of quorum. So incidental motions, we're going to move on to incidental motions. During the debate, some situations can occur that will call for incidental motions to be made. Incidental motions apply to the method of transacting rather than the substance of business, meaning they refer to how the business is conducted as opposed to the business itself. They have no established order of precedence, but must be decided immediately and before voting on the prior motion. So these are to take from the table, to suspend the rules, to withdraw a motion, to rise to a point of order, to rise to a parliamentary inquiry. To take from the table can only be used if you place something on the table the previous meeting. To suspend the rules, no, you cannot suspend your bylaws. You cannot suspend your bylaws, you cannot suspend your constitution, you cannot suspend the bylaws or the constitution. To suspend the rules, if a chapter has adopted the standing rules, which we can talk about in Q&A. The standing rules, if you have standing rules for your chapter, you may suspend those rules because those rules were adopted by that chapter. You cannot suspend your constitution or your bylaws. To withdraw a motion, the member that made the motion may withdraw the motion once by approval. And to rise to a parliamentary inquiry. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, the final thing we're going to talk about is basically once you have voted and you adopted, you realize, oops, we made a mistake. How to repeal, rescind, and revoke. In this case, once you realize a mistake, you can make another motion. A motion to rescind, to repeal, or null means to strike out an entire motion, resolution, rule, bylaw, or paragraph that has been previously adopted. This motion must be seconded, and it is debatable and amendable. It requires a 2/3 vote to pass unless full previous notice is given. Then it can be passed by a majority vote. If a motion to reconsider is posed, you must complete that motion before making the motion to rescind. A motion to reconsider means to bring back a motion which has been previously voted upon. This motion can only be made by a member who voted on the prevailing side. This means if you voted yes on a motion that passed and then realized that it was not a good decision, you change your mind, You can move to reconsider that motion, but you cannot make the motion if you voted no and it did not pass. It must be made on the same day the motion was voted upon or the next day of the continuing session. It requires a second. It is only debatable if the original motion was debatable. It cannot be amended, and it requires a majority of votes to pass. So, just to go back on a point, when it says it requires a 2/3 vote to pass unless a full previous notice was given, one way to give a full previous notice is to email the host brotherhood about 24 hours in advance before that meeting. That's considered a previous notice. That way it doesn't take a 2/3 vote if it's a majority vote, but only on those special motions. Okay? So basically we're just going to go to summarize the takeaways from this. If you have administrative rules based on motions your chapter has passed over time, specifically related to policy administration, they do not need to be voted on every time and can still be upheld. These are known as the standing rules. Those are the rules that you can suspend, you can change. Those only require a majority vote because they're being adopted by chapter. And you can amend them, and you can basically mold them to fit your chapter. Robert's Rule of Order, parliamentary procedures, is meant to keep your meetings on track and efficient. You do not efficient. If you're using parliamentary procedures and your meetings are running very long and unorganized, please revisit the rules because proper use of parliamentary procedures makes meetings short, efficient, and on track. At minimum, you need a quorum, a presiding officer, and a secretary to hold a meeting. Debate should be follow pro, con, pro. Okay? And that concludes our presentation. I take it back to Mackenzie.
All right. Thank you, Emma. So that was a lot of really good information. And like she said, we'll wrap up the content portion. Now we want to hear from all of you guys listening in with your questions. As stated earlier, you can launch the Q&A widget from the menu dock to submit your questions. This feature will remain open even in on-demand viewing, and if we do not get to your question, we will respond via email. But as a reminder, if you do submit a question, we will give you an entry into winning one of the 5 copies of the ABCs of Parliamentary Procedure, so be sure to get your questions in. This time we're going to go ahead and start with the first question here, and that is, when you're voting, do you need quorum of the entire chapter to win, or just a majority of the members who are present?
Yes. When you're voting, you need the majority of the members who are present. So there are certain votes. For example, your bylaws, if I'm not mistaken, your bylaws for pledges, the bylaws as transferred from the constitution of the organization requires a 25% vote of the member in good standing. That is the only time when a specific vote like that is stated in your bylaws or maybe your standing rules that the chapter has adopted, when that is the only time where it requires the percentage of the entire members in good standing. Any other time, the number of votes that it tells you on the chart, whether it's 2/3 or majority, requires of the members currently at the meeting. I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you. So the next question we have here is, how should you handle a meeting when rules are not being followed and continue to not be followed?
Okay, so number one thing is if you're a member that's not on the board and you notice meetings are not being followed and continue not being followed, what I would suggest is is attend an e-board meeting, meet with the president, meet with the board, and perhaps because a lot of e-board meetings are open. Hopefully the chapters have open e-board meetings and the members can attend e-board meetings, or perhaps talk to the president so we can come up as the board, perhaps bring you in to attend one of those meetings so you can suggest. If the rules are not being followed, it's usually for one or two reasons. It's probably because the board is not very familiar with the bylaws and parliamentary procedures, and the Brotherhood has not looked at their bylaws as well as parliamentary procedures. So I recommend, those are my recommendations, you have the board look at the bylaws, get a parliamentarian and a warden, and see how that works.
Great. All right, the next question is kind of a yes or no question, saying that amendments should be just slight changes to the motion and shouldn't necessarily create a new or a secondary motion within that. right? Someone that if they have a really big change, that should be created just a new motion. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, repeat that again?
Yeah. Say if someone has just a slight change to a motion, that would be an amendment. But if they have like a
Yes.
major change, they should just vote against the motion and create a new one. Is that correct?
Well, it depends. Truth be told, if the motion, if the new motion is completely different, is not related to that topic at all, to the motion on the whole, then yes, they should go ahead and change, just vote against that motion and bring up that new motion if it's different. But if it is within the same topic and it's changing the idea of it, it can still be an amendment.
All right, thank you. Next question we have is how and when is it appropriate for the chair to make a motion? And then kind of follow up on that, how and when is it appropriate for the chair to vote on a motion?
Okay, so the chair can break a tie. That's the only time when the presiding officer may vote, is when there is a tie and he breaks the tie, or he or she breaks the tie. When a chair wants to move, it's when the chair can temporarily stop presiding. So basically what the chair does is remove itself as the chair and gives the chair to the succession, to the next in line, either the vice president or the next person that comes on the line of succession. But the trick is once you give that position up, the person that you give that to does not necessarily have to give it back to you as the chair. So you might lose your chair for the rest of the meeting.
All right. Next question we have is, how do you know if a person voted in favor of a motion unless you do voting by roll call?
Okay, so that is always a really good question that comes up. So which is one I always respond. It's a good thing that we're founded on integrity. And as a member, that is one of the things that the chair usually is counting the votes. So when you're doing an all in favor, usually you raise your hand. And then that's a clear route. But when you're doing voice call, when it's just I or no name, truth be told, the member is relying upon their integrity at the time if they voted against the motion or not.
All right. Next question we have is, how should you best educate your members on parliamentary procedure?
The best way to educate your members on parliamentary procedures is to have your parliamentarian hold small little, one or two ways. You could do small little chapter, have the parliamentarian have a slot on your agenda every chapter or twice a chapter or 3 times a month, and they can come up with a skit. That's what that's the most effective way is through skits. So basically the parliamentary chair would have a parliamentary committee, and we would meet and come up with fun little skits and present it to chapter and have chapter interact and ask questions. That's one way. Second way is have people be part of the parliamentary committee. You're a parliamentarian, have your little committees, meet up, have chapters come outside of chapters so you don't take up time. It's a really great way to teach people about Robert's Rule of Order.
Great. The next question we have is kind of referencing that you mentioned that quorum for us is 50% attendance plus 1. Is this kind of the universal rule for all Robert's Rules of Orders, or is this specifically AK Psy's rule?
That is all Robert's Rule of Order. Quorum is 50% plus 1. And it's stated as well as in your bylaws and Constitution for AK Psy, because AK Psy adopted Robert's Rule.
Right. So the next question we have is, what advice can you recommend for chapter meetings and the use of technology during them? Are you allowed to implement a no laptop policy? Does that have anything to do with parliamentary procedure? Can you put that in your rules? Anything like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Robert's Rule of Order is meant to fit to you, to your chapters. That's why it's called for the debating assembly. So, deliberative assembly. So you can have in your standing rules no laptops, etc. But the thing is, chapter has to vote on it. It is not, e-board cannot just come one chapter and be like, okay guys, this is a new rule. Robert's Rule is meant to give every member a voice and be able to participate. So as long as we put it up to a vote and it becomes part of your standing rule, that can be the standing rule of the chapter, yes.
All right. The next question we have is, what suggestions do you have for a smooth transition into actually implementing using parliamentary procedure with your chapter?
I say just start. truth be told, the chair or the presiding officer, start with a parliamentarian, start with a warden to keep order. The chair or the chair start really educating themselves about Robert's Rule of Order and start restating the motions. Start ignoring out of order people that are because the chair has the authority to not recognize a brother that's spoken out of turn, that's not recognized. The warden can enforce that. Start enforcing and explaining what you're doing. As the chair, you can say, okay guys, we'll now go into voting. This vote requires a 2/3 vote. Please look at your chart. Start passing out the 13 ranking motion chart around chapter. Have people follow it. Every motion that a brother makes, if it can be put in a projector or and be explained, start explaining the steps you're doing so people can follow along. And slowly but surely, if your parliamentarian is enforcing and helping, if your warden is enforcing order, it should start to slowly get there. That would be the transitioning I would suggest.
All right, next question we have is, can standing rules be implemented each term for a chapter?
Yes, it can. The standing rule can be said, so the standing rule is a standing rule until it's voted out. Unless when you voted on the standing rule, it gives it a term limit. So remember, the standing rule is tailored to your chapter. So the new e-board, for example, meet their first e-board meeting. They decided these are going to be the rules for the chapter. They present it to chapter the first meeting or so. And at the end of the standing rule, it says to be effective for one term until the next new term. Once chapter vote on that standing rule, chapter can make amendments to it. Chapter can change, cross out, strike out. Chapter can decide to not vote on it at all. Once that's adopted by the chapter, that becomes that standing rule. And if it states that it's until the new term, then that's when it is. If it doesn't have a term limit, like every motion, that motion is there until someone votes it out or rescind it or amend it.
All right, and kind of an extension of that, can you go into explaining how to suspend the rules again?
Okay, so to suspend the rules basically is you move to, give me a second, I'm just going to pull up the chart here. Okay, so I move to suspend the rules. It's really simple. It's a motion that takes a majority vote, and I move to suspend the standing rule that states that all members should say aye, or all members should wear white to chapter. You just move it, and you follow the 7 steps, and it just gets adopted. The standing rules is suspend the standing rules is a simple majority motion that a member makes in the beginning of chapter or in the middle of chapter to basically go over a rule that's preventing them from doing what the rule says. Does that explain it? Does that answer it?
I think so. All right, we'll go ahead and go on to the next question, and that's, what should you do when debate gets off topic?
Okay, when debate gets off topic, you can either do, I call the previous question, I call for the orders of the day. Those are my favorite motions on earth, either because they're not debatable and they can interrupt. So basically, as a member, as the parliamentarian, if I'm standing in the meeting and the debate is getting off topic, you call for the orders of the day, and it basically brings it back to what we were discussing. So then the chair responds and says, orders of the day has been called. We will now go into debating about such and such. If the debate is getting so off topic that no one knows what we're arguing about now, we started off with debating about pizza, now we're in lollipop. As a member, you simply call for the previous question so we can vote on whether or not we're going to adopt pizza or not. And that just requires a 2/3 vote.
Great. All right, so next question we have is, what happens if we have quorum at the beginning of the meeting, but people leave and then you no longer have quorum?
What happens, I'm sorry?
Say, if you have quorum at the beginning of the meeting, but then people have to leave for whatever reason, and then you no longer have quorum, what should you do?
Meeting stops. Meeting stops, and hopefully you start calling people. No, meeting stops. Once you lose quorum, the meeting stops. Then the only motion you can the only thing you could do is fix the time of which to adjourn.
And next question is, what do you do?
Because you can't even adjourn. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead and finish your statement there.
Because you can't even adjourn. Adjourn requires the chapter to vote on it, and you can't properly adjourn a meeting until you have quorum. So basically, fix the time of which to adjourn. It allows you to do that, so we just decide when are we going to continue this meeting. That's the only motion we can make.
Great, thank you. And then the next question we have is, so what do you do in the case of a tie vote?
On tie votes, the chair breaks the tie. The chair can either ask for a revote and make it clear. If we're voting by aye or nay, to make it clear, the chair can ask for a revote. Not a revote, but the chair can basically we will go into revoting on this, or the chair breaks the tie. The chair can say there is a tie. As the chair, where the ayes have it. The chair calls it. So again, the presiding officer determines the result of restates the vote. So if the chair notices that there's a tie and the chair agrees with the motion, the tie can simply say the ayes have it, without even stating whether or not there was a tie, because he technically breaks the tie, or he or she.
All right, and it looks like we only have one last question, so if we don't get any more in, this will be the last question. And so we mentioned that chairs can break a tie. Is the chair able to vote in elections for chapter officers and for pledges?
Unless it states in your bylaws that the chair can do that. If we're going to go by a default Roberts rule, the chair can only break a tie.
All right. With that, it looks like we don't have any other questions. Yep, did you want to add a little bit more to that?
No, because, I was just simply going to mention is just as the chair, the point of the chair, the role of the chair, it's a gift, and as you might say, a curse. The role of it is to stay impartial and be able to keep meetings in order. And I understand, we're brotherhood, and, your input counts as a brother. However, if your bylaws does not authorize you to vote on a specific vote, your job is basically like the Vice President of the United States. You break a vote. Break a tie.
All right. Thank you for that, Emma. So then with that, that is going to be all the time we have for today. I do want to thank all of our participants and callers for all of your guys' great questions and comments. We will draw for the winning 5 chapters after the webinar and contact you tomorrow. For any follow-up questions or conversation you might have, feel free to contact Emma using the information that's provided on the screen. I'd like to thank Emma again for her great insight and expertise today. Finally, we do have upcoming programs listed on the myaksi.org website, including several upcoming webinars and new e-learnings available for you to watch, including e-learnings on the 7 steps to handling emotion and the various types of motions. So do continue to watch the website and our social media as we add new resources available to you. If you have any suggestions for future topics, please send them to education@aksi.org. Again, thank you to our presenter, and thank you for joining us.